You're probably using someone else's card. There's no way someone like you has this kind of money, said Kyle Evans. His voice filled with smug disbelief as he waved Leela Wright's bank card like it was counterfeit trash. The words didn't just sting, they shattered the air. Conversations in the lobby of KeyBank stopped cold. A child clutched his mother's hand tighter. An elderly man turned slowly toward the counter, and Leela. She stood completely still as if the world had paused around her, her calm expression unable to hide the fire rising behind her eyes. But before we continue with what happened next, where are you watching from? And if this story already has you holding your breath, take a second to subscribe to our channel. Tap the like button so more people can hear stories that matter, stories that reveal truth, expose injustice, and remind us of the quiet power of standing tall when the world tries to shove you down. Now, back to Isla. She had walked into the sleek glass-fronted branch in downtown Atlanta with a simple mission: withdraw $10,000 from her nonprofit organization's account. The money had been hard-earned, grants, donations, community support, and was intended to fund the opening of a literacy center for underprivileged children on the South Side. Leela, a 52-year-old former teacher, now ran the South Grove Community Initiative, a nonprofit that had become the heart of her neighborhood. She didn't look wealthy. Her blouse was pressed but plain, her shoes sensible. Her purse was functional, not fashionable. But she walked with the quiet assurance of someone who had built something from nothing. Someone who had taught hundreds of children to read. Someone who had kept her dignity, even when others tried to strip it away. Kyle Evans didn't see any of that. The moment she approached his counter, his eyes scanned her outfit, then her skin, and his posture shifted, condescending, dismissive, as if she were wasting his time. When she handed him her ID and debit card, she said politely, "Good morning. I'd like to make a withdrawal, please. 10,000. Kyle didn't even glance at her identification before scoffing. 10,000. Seriously, you expect me to just hand that over?" Ella replied calmly. "It's from my organization's account. The funds are for our youth reading program." He looked her over again, this time with open suspicion. "What organization doesn't look like you run anything?" he said, eyes narrowing. "This card could belong to anyone. Do you even know the account number?" Ella felt her hands tighten slightly, but kept her voice even. "Yes, it's under the South Grove Community Initiative. I'm the director. My name is Leela Wright. You can verify it in your system." Kyle smirked, shook his head, and muttered loud enough for others to hear. "Right, another story. You people always have one. That did it." A wave of shame and disbelief rushed over Illa's face, but she refused to lower her head. She straightened her shoulders and asked, "I'd like to speak to a manager." "Sure," Kyle said with a grin. "Let's bring someone who can really explain why this isn't going to happen." A moment later, Victoria Allen walked over from her office. She was tall, composed, and wore a navy suit so precisely pressed it could cut glass. But her eyes never once met Illa's. She walked straight to Kyle and asked, "What's the problem?" Kyle replied, "Possible fraud. She's claiming this is her account but nothing checks out. It doesn't feel right." "That's a lie?" Ella said, stepping forward. "All my documents are here. Just verify the information. I've banked here for years." But Victoria didn't bother. She gave Ella a quick glance, then turned back to Kyle. "Do you feel unsafe?" she asked. "I feel like she's trying something shady," he replied. Crossing his arms, Victoria looked back at Ella, tone flat and final. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." "What?" Ella asked, the shock rising in her throat. "You haven't even checked my account. We reserve the right to refuse service," Victoria said coldly. "And right now your behavior is making my staff uncomfortable." "My behavior?" Ella said, voice shaking. "I've said nothing inappropriate. I've simply asked you to verify my identity. Please, that money is for children." Victoria didn't respond. She turned and signaled to the security guard. "Mason, please escort this woman out." Mason Stewart, a large man with broad shoulders and a badge that read private security, approached without a word. Illa's voice rose, not in anger but in sheer disbelief. "You're making a mistake. This is my account." Mason didn't care. He took her by the arm and began to guide her away. "Don't touch me," she said sharply, pulling back. But it was too late. Her ID and bank card fell from the counter onto the tile floor as Mason ushered her past, confused and silent onlookers. One woman clutched her purse to her chest. A man in a flannel shirt pulled out his phone and began filming. Illa was pushed outside, the glass doors closing behind her with a finality that felt like a prison gate. She stood on the sidewalk, chest heaving, blinking back tears. Her hands shook as she reached into her purse. She tapped a number on her phone, one she knew by heart, and raised it to her ear. "Charles," she said, her voice low but steady. "You need to get down here right now. They just kicked me out of your bank." Outside the bank, Isla Wright stood with her phone clutched in her hand, her breath still shallow, her eyes scanning the faces that passed her by as if looking for proof that she hadn't just imagined the whole thing. But the humiliation was real. She could still feel Mason's grip on her arm, still hear Kyle's mocking tone, still see Victoria's cold eyes brushing her off like she didn't belong inside the glass doors. The air was still thick with tension, but to Kyle Evans and Victoria Allen, the storm had passed. "I swear," Kyle muttered with a smirk, shaking his head as he returned to his station. These people think they can just stroll in and pull one over on us. Victoria chuckled dryly, straightening the cuffs of her blazer. It's always the same, loud, emotional, and entitled. She's lucky we didn't call the cops. What neither of them noticed was that someone had already pressed record. Elijah Edwards, a 60-year-old retired mechanic with a slow gait and sharp instincts, had watched the entire encounter from one of the lounge chairs near the teller line. His phone now captured the smug laughter of Kyle, the clipped, dismissive tone of Victoria, and the ease with which they joked about throwing a woman out who had done nothing wrong without a word. Elijah uploaded the video to TikTok. The caption read, "Black woman kicked out of Atlanta bank while trying to withdraw her own money. Fake discrimination. This is America." Within minutes it began to spread outside. Illa took a long, steadying breath and looked up. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not where they could still see her. Instead, she dialed a second number. "Dylan, it's Illa. I need you to tell Charles it's urgent. Tell him it happened again." Dylan Parker, Charles's executive assistant, didn't ask questions. He heard the weight in her voice and was already grabbing his keys. Meanwhile, inside, the mood had relaxed. Kyle leaned against the counter, recounting the event to a coworker, embellishing it with sneering flair. "You should have seen her acting all righteous, probably printing fake IDs in her basement." Victoria's face twitched into a grin, but the moment was interrupted by a voice behind them. "Excuse me?" Harper Thomas, a white woman in her mid-50s with silver streaks in her chestnut hair and a librarian's quiet strength, stood with her arms folded. "I was here the entire time." That woman was calm, respectful. "She gave you everything you asked for, and you threw her out because she didn't look the part." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Mom, this is not your concern." Harper didn't flinch. "It is now because I'm a customer and I'm filing a complaint. You humiliated someone in front of all of us." Victoria's professional smile returned like a mask. "You're welcome to do so, but we take safety very seriously, and our staff felt threatened." "By a woman in a blouse and flats," Harper snapped. "You felt threatened by her ID." Mason approached quietly from the side, his arms crossed again. His presence made Harper pause, but she didn't step back. "You should all be ashamed." Behind her, a few murmurs of agreement stirred the crowd. Elijah, still recording, caught the entire exchange. His video now had over 8,000 views and climbing. Comments poured in. "Typical. She handled that better than I would have. This is why we don't trust banks." Victoria, growing nervous, whispered something to Kyle, then pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she said aloud, loud enough for everyone to hear. She was suspicious. And now this is escalating. Elijah caught that too. Outside, Isla saw the flashing lights before she heard the sirens. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, lights spinning but sirens off. Officer Gabriel Collins, a white man in his 40s with a tired face, stepped out of one car. Officer Aubrey Scott, a black woman in her early 40s with intelligent eyes and quiet confidence, stepped out of the other. Gabriel approached Victoria first. "We got a report of possible fraud and a public disturbance." Victoria nodded sharply. "Yes, she presented suspicious documents, made a scene. We had to remove her." Aubrey turned toward Isla. Her tone was different, softer, curious. "Mom, can I speak with you for a moment?" Illa nodded. "Please, I want someone to listen." Aubrey stepped aside with her and said gently, "Can I see your ID?" Ella handed it over without a word. Aubrey examined it, then looked back at the bank and the account. "South Grove Community Initiative." Ella replied, "You can look it up. I'm the founder." This was a legitimate withdrawal. Aubrey believed her. She didn't say it out loud yet, but it was in her eyes. Gabriel, meanwhile, was beginning to ask more questions inside. "Did you verify the ID?" "We didn't need to," Victoria said curtly. "It didn't feel right." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "You mean you didn't even check the account?" Before Victoria could answer, a sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a man in a tailored gray suit, tall, commanding, eyes locked onto the glass doors of the bank like a missile. The crowd shifted. Phones rose into the air. Harper's jaw dropped slightly. "Eyes that," she whispered. Elijah, still filming, whispered back, "That's Charles Phillips, CEO of First National." And just like that, the temperature inside the bank dropped 10 degrees. Victoria went pale. Kyle froze mid-sentence. Mason took an unconscious step back. Ila didn't move, didn't speak. She simply looked up at her husband and nodded once. Charles nodded back. He turned toward the doors and said calmly but with steel in his voice, "Open them inside." No one moved. I said, "Open the doors now." And with that, the tide began to turn the moment the glass doors unlocked with a heavy click and Charles Phillips stepped inside. The entire energy in the bank shifted. Conversations stopped midword. Fingers hovered over keyboards. Kyle Evans stiffened like a man who just realized the floor beneath him was cracking. Victoria Allen turned to stone, her clipboard nearly slipping from her hand. Mason Stewart, who just an hour ago had escorted a woman out like she didn't belong, now stood frozen, as if unsure whether to salute or run. Charles's eyes scanned the room, not hurried, not flustered, but calm and calculating, like a man used to walking into boardrooms and knowing the room was already his. Dylan Parker, his assistant, followed behind with a leather folder tucked under his arm. Silent but alert. The security cameras blinked overhead. Phones were still raised in the lobby. and Elijah Edwards was still recording, his lens now fixed on the unfolding reckoning. Illa, now back inside with Officer Aubrey Scott beside her, stood slightly apart, her expression composed but unreadable. She had said nothing since Charles arrived. She didn't need to, he knew. Charles didn't approach the counter or ask permission to speak. He addressed the entire bank with the quiet power of a man who had spent decades building something and wasn't about to watch it be tarnished by the people paid to protect it. "I'm Charles Phillips," he said evenly, "President and CEO of KeyBank." A gasp rippled through the customers. Harper Thomas whispered her husband. "I knew it." Charles continued, his voice clear. 10 minutes ago your staff forcibly removed my wife, Lila Wright Phillips, from this building. She was attempting to make a legitimate withdrawal from a nonprofit account tied to this very institution. Not only was she dismissed without verification, she was insulted, humiliated, and physically handled without cause. He paused, letting the words settle like bricks. "I'd like an explanation." Victoria tried to recover, stepping forward with the remnants of her professionalism. "Mr. Phillips, this was a misunderstanding. Your wife, Miss Wright, presented documents that seemed inconsistent. Our teller followed protocol. Did you verify her identity?" he asked sharply. "Did you check the account?" "We didn't get that far," Victoria stammered. She became agitated. Charles's tone didn't rise, but it sharpened. She became agitated because she was being treated like a criminal. She presented her ID, her card, and account information. That's all she should have needed. Kyle opened his mouth to speak, but Charles cut him off without even turning to look. "Don't, you've done enough." He stepped to the counter and gestured to Dylan. "Pull the transaction log and the customer profile for South Grove Community Initiative." Dylan moved quickly, accessing the system with authority. Within seconds, Ila's account appeared on the monitor. Active, verified, healthy balance. Her name was listed as primary account holder. The screen didn't lie. It never had. Charles turned to Gabriel Collins and Aubrey Scott. "You've reviewed the situation." Aubrey nodded. "We've heard both sides from what I've seen. There's no cause for legal action against Mrs. Phillips." "Good," Charles said, then turned back to Victoria, "because the legal action will be coming from us." The crowd began to murmur again. Elijah was still filming. The view count was climbing into the hundreds of thousands. The Fed justice for Ela was trending. Harper stepped forward and addressed Charles directly. "Sir, I don't mean to intrude, but I saw everything. Your wife was calm. She was respectful. It was your staff who escalated. And when she asked for help, they treated her like she didn't exist." Charles nodded, gratitude flashing briefly in his eyes. "Thank you. Your voice matters more than you know." Isla stepped beside him now. She didn't need protection. She needed to be seen. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice steady. "It's about every person who walks into places like this and is told without words or with them that they don't belong, that their money isn't good enough, that their skin is suspicious. This happens every day. I just happen to have someone in power to call." Her words silenced the room. Even Mason lowered his eyes. Kyle's face was flushed, his smirk long gone. Victoria's hands were trembling slightly now, her composure cracking at the edges. Charles looked around. "As of this moment, the branch will be undergoing a full internal review. All involved parties will be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. If we determine this was not an isolated incident, and from what I've heard it wasn't, there will be permanent consequences." Victoria opened her mouth again, desperate. "With all due respect, sir, I was following bank procedure." "No," Charles interrupted. "You were following your assumptions. There is no policy at this bank that gives you the right to ignore protocol, skip verification, and humiliate a client based on a feeling." Dylan handed him a printed copy of the account verification and security footage request. Charles glanced at it, then turned back to his staff. "I expect written statements by end of day. Effective immediately. You're relieved of customer-facing duties." The color drained from Kyle's face. Victoria looked like she might faint. Mason took one slow step back, suddenly aware that the cameras were still rolling. Illa looked toward the crowd, her eyes landing on Harper. Then Elijah. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being witnesses." Elijah gave her a thumbs up. Harper smiled tearfully. Gabriel Collins signaled to Aubrey that their part was finished. No arrest, no charge, just the truth, finally taking center stage. Charles reached for Illa's hand. She took it without hesitation. Together, they stood in the middle of the bank that had tried to erase her, and now had no choice but to reckon with her. Charles Phillips didn't yell. He didn't have to. His voice, calm and deliberate, echoed across the polished lobby with more weight than a shout ever could. "Victoria, Kyle, Mason, you will explain yourselves fully." And right now, the three of them stood under the glow of the overhead lights. Suddenly small, their earlier arrogance now stripped bare in front of dozens of customers. 2 uniformed officers and a smartphone audience that had grown into the millions. Victoria Allen tried to square her shoulders, tried to regain her composure, but her voice betrayed her. "Mr. Phillips, I was acting out of caution. We've had fraud cases recently and the situation felt off." "Off?" Charles asked, his voice razor sharp but steady. "What about it felt off? The ID, the debit card, the account verification she offered? Or was it simply the fact that my wife doesn't dress like a hedge fund client?" Victoria's jaw tightened. I followed protocol. No, Charles interrupted, his eyes locked onto hers. You followed your bias. You saw a black woman in modest clothing asking for a large withdrawal. And instead of doing your job verifying the account, you assumed she didn't belong. You made a judgment based on appearance. And in doing so, you disrespected not only a customer, not only my wife, but everything this bank claims to stand for. Harper Thomas stood off to the side, hands folded, quietly nodding. Elijah kept filming. Officer Aubrey Scott shifted her weight subtly, arms crossed, visibly moved by Hila's composure. Victoria swallowed but said nothing more. Kyle Evans, who had once spoken with so much confidence, now seemed unable to meet Charles's gaze. Sir, I didn't mean anything personal. You just made assumptions. Charles cut in. You mocked her, called her a scammer, smirked while you dismissed her credentials, and now you're hiding behind excuses. It's unacceptable, Mason. The security guard remained silent, his arms no longer folded, his posture now defensive rather than authoritative. Charles turned to him next. You forcibly removed a woman from this building without verifying anything. Did she yell? Did she make threats? No, she stood her ground. And you treated her like a criminal. Why? Mason looked down. I was just doing what the manager told me. Hila finally stepped forward, her voice clear, unwavering. And that's the problem. Mason, you didn't ask questions. You didn't hesitate. You just followed orders. That's how injustice survives. Because good people do nothing. Her words landed with a weight that no one in the lobby could ignore. A young black woman near the back of the room wiped a tear from her cheek. An older couple nodded silently. Even Gabriel Collins, the white officer, seemed visibly affected. Ella turned toward the growing crowd and continued. I didn't come here today to make a statement. I came to withdraw money to open a reading center for children. That money was earned honestly through community work, donations, grants. Do you know what it feels like to fight for every dollar only to be told by someone behind a desk that you don't look like you should have any of it? Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't pause. I've been a teacher. I've worked with mothers trying to read their child a bedtime story for the first time. I've stayed up past midnight writing grant proposals so kids in our neighborhood could have books, not bullets. And today I was dragged out like a thief. Not because of anything I did, but because of what they saw when they looked at me. The silence in the lobby was now complete. No tapping keyboards, no whispered conversations, just the sound of truth hanging in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Charles placed a hand gently on Ella's back. Proud but not surprised, he stepped forward again. Effective immediately, he announced Victoria Allen is suspended from all managerial duties. Kyle Evans the same. Mason Stewart, your contract with this branch is terminated. HR will follow up within the hour and legal will be in contact regarding civil liability exposure. Victoria's mouth fell open. Wait, you can't. I can and I am, Charles said without emotion. I gave each of you an opportunity to tell the truth. You chose to lie. You chose to protect yourselves instead of this institution's values. There's no place for that here. The lobby erupted into soft applause. Customers who had stayed silent now stepped forward. That's right. Someone whispered. Finally, someone doing the right thing. Elijah's live stream comments were coming in by the second. Accountability.